The convent doors loomed before Faith Langley like the gates of a prison, their weathered wood dark against the Arizona sunset, and every step her father forced her to take toward them felt like walking toward her own grave. Prescott, Arizona in the summer of 1882, was a town caught between civilization and wilderness, where dusty streets gave way to sprawling desert landscapes, and the promise of a new frontier still lingered in the air. Faith had lived here her entire 19 years, watching the town grow from a rough mining camp into something resembling respectability. But she had never imagined she would end up here, standing before the Sisters of Mercy Convent with her father's iron grip on her elbow and her mother's tearful eyes watching from the wagon. "This is for your own good," her father said, his voice as hard as the desert rock beneath their feet. Samuel Langley was a banker, a man who dealt in numbers and certainties, and he had decided his daughter's fate with the same cold calculation he applied to ledgers. "After what happened with the Harrison boy, your reputation is ruined. No decent man will have you now. The sisters will give you purpose, discipline. You will learn to serve God instead of shaming your family." Faith wanted to scream that nothing had happened with Matthew Harrison, that they had only talked, that the rumors were vicious lies spread by his jealous former sweetheart. But her father had never believed her, and her protests had only made him angrier. 3 days ago, he had announced her fate over dinner as casually as discussing the weather. She would enter the convent and take her vows. Her life was decided. "Father, please," she whispered, hating the tremor in her voice. "I do not have a calling. I am not meant for this life." "You are meant for whatever I say you are meant for," he replied, pulling her forward. "You are my daughter and you will obey." The desert stretched endlessly to the east, burnished gold and crimson in the fading light. Faith had always loved these wide open spaces, the way the sky seemed infinite and full of possibilities. She loved to ride, to feel the wind in her dark hair, to imagine herself galloping towards some grand adventure. Now those dreams seemed as distant as the horizon itself. As they approached the heavy wooden doors, Faith heard the sound of hoofbeats behind them. She turned, hope flaring inexplicably in her chest, and saw a rider approaching fast. The man sat his horse with easy confidence, his broad-shouldered silhouette cutting a striking figure against the sunset. As he drew closer, Faith could see he wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: worn denim, a leather vest, a hat pulled low against the sun. He slowed his mount as he reached them, and Faith found herself staring into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. "Evening," the cowboy said, tipping his hat. His gaze swept over the scene, taking in Faith's pale face, her father's stern expression, the forbidding convent doors. Something flickered in those blue eyes, something like recognition or understanding. "Samuel Langley," her father stiffened. "Do I know you?" "Name is Pierce Thornton," the man said. His voice was deep and warm, with a slight Texas drawl that made Faith think of wide prairies and freedom. "I have business with you regarding a loan for expanding my ranch. Your clerk said I might find you here." "This is hardly the time," Samuel said coldly. "Make an appointment at the bank tomorrow." Pierce Thornton did not move. His eyes had settled on Faith, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. She had never seen him before, she was certain of that, but something in his gaze made her heart race. He looked at her as if he could see straight through to her soul, as if he understood exactly what was happening here. "Madam," he said softly, addressing her directly. "You look like you are heading somewhere you do not want to go." Faith's breath caught. Her father's grip tightened painfully on her arm. "My daughter's situation is none of your concern, Mr. Thornton." "Now, if you will excuse us—" "Actually," Pierce interrupted, his tone still polite but with an edge of steel beneath it, I think it is my concern. This is still America, last I checked. A woman has a right to choose her own path. She is my daughter, Samuel snarled. She is 19 years old and under my authority. She has disgraced this family, and she will do as I say. Pierce dismounted in one fluid motion, moving to stand between Faith and the convent doors. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall and lean with the kind of strength that came from hard work rather than soft living. Faith could see a scar along his jawline, the calloused roughness of his hands, the way he carried himself with quiet confidence. He was perhaps 25, she guessed, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that curled slightly beneath his hat. Seems to me a young woman old enough to take holy vows is old enough to make that choice herself, Pierce said. He looked at Faith again, and this time she saw something in his eyes that made her pulse race. It was not pity, but rather a fierce respect, as if he saw her as a person with her own will and worth. "Madam, do you want to go into that convent?" The question hung in the air like a lightning strike. Faith could feel her father trembling with rage beside her, could hear her mother's sharp intake of breath from the wagon. But all she could focus on was this stranger, this cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere to ask her the one question no one else had bothered with. She started, and her voice came out small and frightened. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time. "No, I do not." "Faith," her mother cried. "You ungrateful girl," her father hissed. "After everything we have done for you, if the lady does not want to go, then she does not have to," Pierce said, his voice calm but immovable as stone. "Like I said, this is a free country." "This is kidnapping," Samuel spat. "I will have the sheriff. The sheriff will tell you the same thing I am telling you," Pierce replied. "Your daughter is of age. She can make her own choices. You cannot force her into a convent against her will." Faith felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. This stranger, this cowboy she had never met, was standing up to her father in a way she had never dared. Hope and terror warred in her chest. Could it really be this simple? Could she really just refuse? "Madam," Pierce said, turning to her fully now. His blue eyes held hers with an intensity that made her dizzy. "I know I am a stranger to you. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I am offering you a choice. You can walk through those doors if that is truly what you want, or you can choose a different path. You can choose to live your own life, make your own decisions. It is up to you." "And what exactly are you proposing?" Samuel demanded. "That my daughter run off with some drifter cowboy." "That will only confirm every sordid rumor. I am proposing," Pierce said quietly, never taking his eyes from Faith, "that your daughter choose love instead of fear, freedom instead of prison, life instead of a living death." Faith's hands were shaking. She pressed them together, trying to steady herself. Everything in her upbringing told her to obey her father, to accept her punishment, to walk through those doors and submit to the life he had chosen for her. But something deeper, something wild and true, was screaming at her to run. "I do not know you," she whispered to Pierce. "No, madam, you do not," he agreed. "But I know what it is like to be trapped, to feel like the walls are closing in. I know what it is like to choose freedom when everyone tells you to do otherwise." He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. "I came to Prescott looking to put down roots, to build something lasting. I have a ranch about 10 miles outside town, good land with water rights and room to grow. I have been alone there too long, working myself to the bone with no one to share it with. When I saw you just now, standing there looking like you were about to walk into your own grave, something in me just knew. I know this is crazy. I know we just met, but I am asking you anyway. Choose life with me instead of death behind those walls. Choose love." "This is insane," Samuel said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Faith could feel his grip loosening on her arm. Maybe it is, Pierce agreed. But sometimes the sanest thing you can do is something crazy. He held out his hand to Faith. What do you say, madam? Will you take a chance on something real instead of accepting something false? Faith looked at his outstretched hand. It was scarred and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard and honestly. Then she looked at the convent doors, dark and imposing in the gathering dusk. Finally, she looked at her father's face, rigid with anger and wounded pride. I am sorry, father, she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. But I cannot do this. I cannot lock myself away to salvage your pride or quiet the town gossips. I will not take vows I do not believe in. I will not pretend to have a calling I do not feel. If you walk away now, you are no daughter of mine, Samuel said, his voice like ice. The words should have broken her heart, but instead Faith felt strangely light, as if a great weight had lifted from her shoulders. Then I suppose I am no daughter of yours, she said quietly. She turned to Pierce and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and steady. I will go with you. Pierce's face broke into a smile that transformed him completely, lighting up his features with genuine joy. You will not regret this, I promise you that. Faith, no, her mother wailed from the wagon. Please, think about what you are doing. Faith looked back at her mother, feeling a pang of genuine sorrow. Martha Langley was a kind woman, but she had spent her entire life deferring to her husband, accepting his authority without question. Faith loved her, but she could not become her. I am thinking, Mama, she said gently. For the first time in days, I am actually thinking clearly. I love you, but I cannot live the life Father has chosen for me. I have to choose my own path. Pierce helped her up onto his horse with gentle hands, then swung up behind her. Faith could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength of his arms as they came around her to hold the reins. She had never been this close to a man before, and the intimacy of it made her blush. Hold on, he murmured in her ear, and then they were moving, the horse leaping forward into a canter that quickly became a gallop. The desert flew past them in a blur of color and light. Faith could hear her father shouting behind them, but the words were lost in the thunder of hoofbeats and the rush of wind. They rode hard for several miles, putting distance between them and the town. As the adrenaline began to fade, Faith became acutely aware of the reality of what she had just done. She had run away with a complete stranger. She had defied her father and abandoned her family. She had no money, no possessions beyond the simple dress she wore, no plan for the future. Fear crept into her chest, cold and insidious. As if sensing her turmoil, Pierce slowed the horse to a walk. They had entered a landscape of rolling hills dotted with juniper and pine, the desert giving way to slightly greener country. The first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. You can change your mind, Pierce said quietly. I meant what I said about giving you a choice. If you want, I can take you back to town, help you find a respectable place to stay. Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house for women, very proper and safe. You do not have to stay with me just because I helped you get away. Faith twisted in the saddle to look at him. In the fading light, his face was shadowed and serious. Why did you help me? She asked. You said you have business with my father. You probably ruined any chance of getting that loan. Pierce shrugged. Some things are more important than money. I could not stand there and watch you be forced into a life you did not want. It would not have been right. But why do you care? You do not know me. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When I was 17, he finally said, my father tried to force me into taking over his mercantile business back in Texas. He had my whole life planned out, every detail. But I did not want to spend my days behind a counter, adding up figures and measuring out flour. I wanted to work with horses, to build something with my own hands, to live on my own terms. When I told him that, he said I was a fool and a disappointment. He told me if I walked away from the business, I was walking away from the family. Pierce paused, his jaw tightening. So I walked away. It was the hardest thing I ever did, leaving my mother and my sisters. But I knew if I stayed, I would spend the rest of my life resenting him and hating myself. Sometimes you have to choose your own happiness, even when it hurts. Faith felt something shift in her chest. Do you regret it? Not for a single day, he said firmly. I built my ranch from nothing, worked cattle drives and saved every penny, learned everything I could about ranching and horses. It was hard, probably the hardest years of my life. But it was my life, my choice, and that made all the difference. He looked at her intently. I saw that same trapped look in your eyes that I used to see in my own mirror. I could not walk away and do nothing. You called it choosing love, Faith said softly. But you and I, we do not know each other. How can it be love? Pierce smiled slightly. Maybe love is not the right word yet. Maybe it is more like choosing the possibility of love, choosing hope. You can learn to love a life built on your own terms. And who knows? Maybe we will learn to love each other too, given time. The suggestion made Faith's heart flutter. She had never really thought about love before, not the real kind. There had been Matthew Harrison, of course, but that had been more of a friendship than anything romantic. He had been the banker's son courting the banker's daughter, everything neat and arranged and proper. They had talked about books and music, gone on carefully chaperoned walks. It had been pleasant but passionless, and when the rumors started, Matthew had not defended her. He had simply stopped calling, protecting his own reputation while hers burned. But this wild flight into the desert with a stranger, this felt like something different entirely. This felt like the beginning of an actual adventure. Tell me about your ranch, she said, deciding to focus on practical matters before her emotions overwhelmed her. Pierce's face lit up as he talked, his love for the land evident in every word. The Thornton ranch was small but growing, he explained, with good grazing land and access to a reliable creek. He raised horses primarily, specializing in training cutting horses for ranch work. He had a small herd of cattle as well, enough to supplement his income, but not so many that he could not manage them alone. The house was simple, just 3 rooms, but solidly built and weatherproof. He had started building it himself 2 years ago when he first claimed the land. As he talked, Faith found herself relaxing against him, lulled by the steady rhythm of the horse's gait and the warmth of his voice. She asked questions, and he answered them patiently, never making her feel foolish for not knowing about ranch life. She learned that he rose before dawn every day, that he loved the smell of coffee brewing over a morning fire, that he had a particular fondness for Appaloosa horses because of their intelligence and spirit. Small details, but they painted a picture of a man who was thoughtful and passionate about his work. "What about you?" Pierce asked after a while. "What do you love? What makes you happy?" The question caught Faith off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. Her father had dictated her education, her activities, her social calendar. Her mother had taught her to sew and cook and manage a household, all in preparation for marriage to some suitable man. But no one had ever asked what she wanted, what brought her joy. "I love to read," she said slowly, testing the words. "My father thought it was frivolous, but I used to sneak books from the lending library. I love stories about faraway places, about people who have grand adventures, and I love to ride. My father kept a horse for me, and sometimes I could convince him to let me ride out into the desert. Those were the times I felt most free, most like myself." Well, "There are plenty of horses on the ranch," Pierce said with a smile in his voice. "And I think Mrs. Henderson probably has some books you could borrow if you decide to stay in town. Or we could order some from San Francisco if you want. I do not read much myself, but I would not mind having someone around who could read to me in the evenings. Gets lonely out there sometimes, with no voice but my own." The casual way he included her in his future plans, as if it were already decided that she belonged there, made Faith's throat tight with emotion. This man, this stranger, was offering her more freedom and respect than her own father ever had. They rode in comfortable silence for a while longer, until lights appeared in the distance. It was not much, just a small ranch house with warm yellow light glowing in the windows and a barn and some corrals nearby. But to Faith, after the day she had had, it looked like salvation. Pierce dismounted and then helped her down, his hands steady on her waist. For a moment they stood very close, and Faith could see the concern in his eyes. "I know this is all happening very fast," he said quietly. "I know you must be scared and confused, but I want you to know that you are safe here. I have a room you can use, and I will sleep in the barn. No expectations, no pressure. You can stay as long as you need to figure out what you want to do next. And if you decide you want to go back to town or somewhere else entirely, I will help you do that. You are free here, Faith, truly free." Hearing him say her name for the first time sent a shiver through her. She realized he must have heard it when her father said it back at the convent. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me a choice." He smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Thank you for choosing to take a chance. I promise I will do everything I can to make sure you do not regret it." The house was simple but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, and two smaller rooms branching off from it. Pierce showed her to one of the bedrooms, which contained a narrow bed with a colorful quilt, a chest of drawers, and a small mirror on the wall. It was sparse but tidy, and after the opulent prison of her father's house and the grim prospect of a convent cell, it looked absolutely perfect. "It is not much," Pierce said, sounding almost apologetic, "but the bed is comfortable, and I just put fresh sheets on last week. There is a basin and pitcher on the dresser for washing up, and the privy is out back behind the house. I will get a fire going and make us some supper if you are hungry." Faith realized she was starving. She had been too nervous to eat much that day, and the adrenaline of her escape had burned through what little energy she had. "I am very hungry," she admitted. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Pierce looked surprised. "You do not have to, I want to," Faith interrupted. "I may not know much about ranch life, but I do know how to cook. My mother made sure of that. Please let me help. I need to do something useful, or I will just stand here overthinking everything that happened today." Understanding flickered across his face. "All right then. Let me show you where everything is." They worked together in the small kitchen, and Faith found the simple domesticity of it soothing. Pierce had salt pork and beans, some potatoes from his small garden, and even a few precious eggs from the chickens he kept. Together they prepared a simple but hearty meal, moving around each other with surprising ease in the confined space. Pierce told her stories about the ranch, about the neighbors scattered across the surrounding hills, about the town and its characters. He made her laugh with his descriptions of old Pete Morrison, who claimed to have fought in the Mexican War and told increasingly improbable stories about his exploits, and gentle Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house with an iron fist wrapped in lace doilies. Over dinner, Faith found herself talking more freely than she had in years. Maybe it was the strangeness of the situation, or the fact that Pierce was essentially a stranger and therefore had no preconceptions about who she should be. Whatever the reason, words poured out of her. She told him about growing up in Prescott, about watching the town change and grow. She told him about her love of books, about the stories she sometimes wrote in secret notebooks hidden under her mattress. She told him about her mother's quiet sadness and her father's cold ambition. And finally, haltingly, she told him about Matthew Harrison and the rumors that had destroyed her reputation. "He never even kissed me," she said, staring down at her plate. "We were friends, nothing more. We used to talk about books and ideas, things I could never discuss with anyone else." But his former sweetheart, Sarah Whitmore, saw us walking together one evening and started spreading terrible rumors. She told everyone we had been meeting in secret, that I had been throwing myself at him shamelessly. None of it was true, but once the rumors started, no one wanted to hear the truth. Matthew stopped speaking to me. My father was furious, and Sarah looked very satisfied with herself. "That is a cruel thing to do to someone," Pierce said quietly. Faith looked up at him, expecting to see judgment or skepticism, but his eyes held only sympathy and anger on her behalf. It made something in her chest loosen. "My father did not even ask if it was true," she continued. "He just assumed I had disgraced the family. He said no decent man would marry me now, and the best he could do was hide me away in the convent where I could not cause any more trouble. He made it sound like he was being merciful, giving me a respectable option, but it felt like being buried alive." Pierce reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The gesture was simple but profound, his calloused palm warm against her fingers. "You did nothing wrong," he said firmly. "And you have nothing to be ashamed of. Your father was wrong to treat you that way. The whole town was wrong to believe vicious gossip over the word of someone they should have trusted." Faith felt tears prick her eyes. "How can you be so sure? You do not know me." "Maybe I am exactly the kind of woman they say I am." "You are not," Pierce said with absolute certainty. "I can see it in your eyes, hear it in your voice. You are honest and kind and brave. You chose an uncertain future with a stranger over a life of safety and security because you could not live a lie. That takes real courage." He paused, his thumb stroking gently over her knuckles. "Besides, even if every word of those rumors had been true, even if you had kissed Matthew Harrison or held his hand or whispered sweet words to him, that still would not give your father the right to imprison you in a convent. Your life is your own, Faith. Your choices are your own. No one else gets to decide your worth or your future." The tears spilled over then, running hot down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness or shame. They were tears of relief, of release, of finally being seen and understood. Pierce stood and came around the table, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. He held her while she cried, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring soft reassurances. He smelled like leather and sage and horses, clean and earthy and real. Faith buried her face in his chest and let herself break apart, trusting that this stranger would not judge her for her weakness. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back, mortified. "I am sorry," she said, wiping at her face. "I did not mean to fall apart like that." "Do not apologize," Pierce said gently. "You have been through a terrible ordeal. You are allowed to feel whatever you feel." He smiled slightly. "Besides, my shirt will dry, no harm done." Faith laughed shakily. "You are very kind, kinder than I deserve." "You deserve kindness," he said firmly. "You deserve respect and freedom and the chance to build a life that makes you happy. And if I can help you do that, then I consider it an honor." The sincerity in his voice made Faith's heart skip. She looked up at him, really looked at him, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. He was handsome, certainly, with those striking blue eyes and strong features. But it was more than that. There was a goodness in him, a fundamental decency that shone through everything he said and did. He had risked his business relationship with her father to give her a choice. He had opened his home to her without expecting anything in return. He treated her like a person with her own thoughts and feelings, not like property to be managed or a problem to be solved. "Why are you alone?" she asked suddenly. "A man like you, with land and a good heart, surely you could have any woman in the territory. Why were you looking for someone to share your life?" Pierce's expression turned rueful. Not many women want to marry a cowboy with a small ranch and uncertain prospects. The respectable ladies in town want men with steady incomes and social standing. And the few times I tried courting someone, it never felt right. It always felt like we were playing roles, saying the things we were supposed to say, following some script written by someone else. He paused, his eyes intense on hers. "When I saw you today, standing there looking like you would rather die than walk through those doors, something in me recognized something in you, like calling to like. Two people who do not fit in the boxes society wants to put them in." "I know it sounds foolish." "It does not sound foolish," Faith interrupted. "It sounds like the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me." They stood there in the lamplight, hands still clasped, and Faith felt the world shift around them. This was not how she had imagined her life would go. She had thought she would marry someone suitable, someone her father approved of, and settle into a comfortable if passionless existence. She had never dreamed of running away with a cowboy, of choosing freedom and uncertainty over security and respectability. But standing here in this simple ranch house, looking into Pierce Thornton's blue eyes, Faith felt more alive than she ever had in her father's mansion. This was real. This was true. This was what it felt like to actually choose your own life. "I want to stay," she said quietly. "At least for a while, to see if this can work. I do not know anything about ranching, and I am sure I will make 1,000 mistakes, but I want to try. I want to learn. I want to see if we can build something together." Pierce's face broke into that transformative smile again. "I would like that very much. And do not worry about making mistakes. I make them all the time. We will figure it out together." He showed her around the rest of the house, pointing out where he kept supplies and how the stove worked and a dozen other small details of daily life. Faith absorbed it all, determined to be useful and not just a burden. Finally, as exhaustion began to overtake her, Pierce bid her good night and headed out to the barn with a pile of blankets. "You do not have to sleep in the barn," Faith protested. "This is your house." I insist," Pierce said firmly. "You need privacy and rest. I will be perfectly comfortable out there. I have slept in worse places, believe me." He paused at the door. "There is a bolt on your bedroom door and another on the front door. Use them if it makes you feel safer. And if you need anything in the night, anything at all, just call out. I will hear you." After he left, Faith stood in the quiet house, almost unable to believe this was real. Just this morning she had woken in her own bed, dreading the day ahead. Now she was standing in a cowboy's ranch house, free and unchained and facing an uncertain but hopeful future. She washed her face in the basin, changed out of her dress and into the nightgown Pierce had awkwardly provided, which was clearly too large and probably his, and climbed into bed. The sheets smelled like sage and sunshine. Through the window, she could see the vast sweep of stars overhead, more than she had ever seen from town. The desert night was alive with crickets and the distant cry of a coyote. Faith closed her eyes and, for the first time in weeks, fell into a deep and dreamless sleep. She woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment she was disoriented, not recognizing the small room or the rough wooden walls. Then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly, heart pounding. Yesterday had been real. She had really run away. She was really here at Pierce Thornton's ranch, beginning a new life, Faith dressed quickly in her rumpled dress, wishing desperately for clean clothes and a proper bath. She braided her dark hair as best she could without a proper mirror, pinched her cheeks to bring some color to them, and ventured out into the main room. Pierce was at the stove, cooking breakfast with the efficient movements of someone long accustomed to caring for himself. He had already been up for hours, she could tell. His hair was damp as if he had washed at the creek, and he had changed into a fresh shirt. When he heard her, he turned with a smile. "Morning. I hope I did not wake you. I tried to be quiet, but ranch life starts early." "What time is it?" Faith asked. "A little past 6. The sun has been up for an hour already." He gestured to the table where he had set out 2 plates. "I've got bacon and eggs and biscuits. The biscuits are not as good as they should be. I never quite got the hang of them, but they are edible mostly." Faith sat down and Pierce served her breakfast. The food was simple but good, hearty and filling. As they ate, he outlined the day's work. He needed to check on the horses in the far pasture, mend a section of fence that had come down in last week's storm, and work with a young gelding he was training. Faith listened, trying to imagine herself being part of this world. "What can I do to help?" she asked. Pierce looked surprised. "You do not have to, I want to," Faith said firmly. "I am not going to just sit around being decorative and useless. If I am going to be here, I want to contribute. Teach me. Show me what needs to be done." Something warm flickered in Pierce's eyes. "All right then. Can you ride?" "I can," Faith said. "Not as well as you probably, but I am comfortable in a saddle." "Good. Then you can come with me to check the horses. I will saddle up a gentle mare for you and we will make a day of it. Bring you out to see the property, show you around." He paused. "Though I should warn you, your dress is going to get dirty. Ranch work is not exactly ladylike." Faith looked down at her fine cotton dress, already wrinkled and dusty from yesterday's adventure. It was one of her better dresses, suitable for social calls and church. Completely inappropriate for ranch work. "I do not suppose you have any clothes I could borrow, just until I can get something more suitable." Pierce rubbed the back of his neck, looking embarrassed. "I've got some old clothes that might work, though they will be way too big. And I could ride into town later, pick up some things from the general store if you tell me what you need." "You cannot go into town," Faith said quickly. "My father will be looking for me. He might cause trouble for you." "Let him try," Pierce said with a shrug. "But you are right that it might be awkward. Tell you what, I will ask Mrs. Henderson to help. She can get what you need and bring it out here. She is a good woman, discreet, and she has no love for men who try to control their daughters. Her own father tried to marry her off at 16 to a man 3 times her age. She ran away and never looked back. The thought of another woman knowing her story made Faith nervous, but she also recognized the practicality of it. She would need clothes, basic supplies, things she could not get without help. And if Mrs. Henderson had her own history of defying an unreasonable father, perhaps she would understand. "All right," she agreed. "Thank you." After breakfast, Faith changed into a pair of Pierce's old work pants, cinched tight with a belt, and one of his shirts, the sleeves rolled up several times. She looked ridiculous, swimming in clothes far too large, but she felt freer than she ever had in corsets and petticoats. Pierce tried not to laugh when he saw her, with mixed success. "I look absurd," Faith said. "You look perfect," Pierce replied, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. Like someone ready to actually live instead of just existing in some prescribed role. "Come on, let's go see the horses." He saddled 2 horses, a tall roan gelding for himself and a sweet, tempered bay mare for Faith. The mare had gentle eyes and a patient demeanor, and Faith felt immediately comfortable with her. Pierce showed her how to check the saddle cinch, how to mount from the left side, how to hold the reins properly for Western riding, which was different from the English style she had been taught. Then they were riding out into the morning, the sun climbing higher in a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The land rolled out before them in gentle waves, covered in wild grasses and scattered junipers. Birds sang from the trees, and somewhere in the distance, Faith could hear the sound of running water. "That is Granite Creek," Pierce explained, pointing toward the sound. "It runs year-round, which is why this land is so valuable. Water rights are everything out here." The ranch is about 300 acres, stretching from the creek up into those hills. Not huge, but enough for a good operation if managed right. He showed her the boundaries of the property, pointing out landmarks and explaining the ecosystem. Faith listened, fascinated. She had lived in Arizona her whole life, but had never really understood the land beyond the town limits. Now, seeing it through Pierce's eyes, she began to appreciate the subtle beauty of it, the way life adapted and thrived in this seemingly harsh environment. They found the horses in the far pasture, a small herd of about 20 animals grazing peacefully. Pierce knew each one by name and temperament. He pointed out the mares he was planning to breed, the geldings he was training for sale, the older horses he kept because they had earned their retirement. He talked about bloodlines and conformation, about temperament and intelligence, and Faith realized this was more than just a business to him. This was his passion, his life's work. "That one there," Pierce said, pointing to a striking Appaloosa mare with a blanket of spots across her hindquarters. "That is Starlight. She is my foundation mare, the one I am building my breeding program around, smart as a whip and gentle as a lamb. I am hoping she will foal next spring." "She is beautiful," Faith said, watching the mare graze. "They all are," Pierce smiled. "Horses are honest. They do not lie or scheme or spread rumors. They do not care about your reputation or your family name. If you treat them right, they will give you everything they have. There is something pure about that." They worked together mending the fence, Pierce showing Faith how to stretch and secure the wire, how to brace the posts properly. It was hot, hard work, and by midday Faith's hands were sore and her back ached. But there was something deeply satisfying about it, about seeing a problem and fixing it with your own two hands. They ate lunch by the creek, sharing the sandwiches Pierce had packed. The water rushed past them, clear and cold, and Faith waded in up to her knees, gasping at the temperature but loving the refreshing shock of it. "You ever swim here?" she asked. "All the time in summer," Pierce replied. "Best way to cool off after a long day. There is a deeper pool about a quarter-mile upstream, perfect for swimming. I will show you sometime if you want." The casual intimacy of the suggestion, the assumption that there would be more days like this, made Faith's heart flutter. She was beginning to realize that her impulsive decision to run away with this stranger might be the best choice she had ever made. They spent the afternoon working with the young gelding Pierce was training. Faith watched, fascinated, as he patiently guided the horse through various exercises, never using force or fear, just consistent pressure and release. The gelding responded beautifully, clearly trusting this man who worked with him. "The key is making the right thing easy and the wrong thing difficult," Pierce explained. "You never want to scare them or break their spirit. You want them to choose to cooperate because it makes sense to them. It is all about communication and respect." Faith thought about how different that was from the way her father had tried to control her, using fear and shame and force. Pierce's way made so much more sense. Respect and communication. Choice instead of coercion. As the sun began to set, they rode back to the ranch house. Faith was exhausted, every muscle aching, her face sunburned despite her hat. But she felt more alive than she ever had. This was real work, real life. This was choosing to be part of something instead of just passively accepting whatever was handed to you. Over dinner that night, they talked more easily, the conversation flowing naturally now that some of the initial strangeness had worn off. Pierce told her about his childhood in Texas, about his mother who had loved to sing, about his younger sisters who had cried when he left, but who now wrote him letters full of news and affection. His voice grew sad when he talked about his father, about the rift that had never healed. "Do you think he will ever forgive you?" Faith asked quietly. Pierce shrugged. "I do not know. Maybe. Maybe he already has, but is too proud to say so. Either way, I cannot live my life waiting for his approval. I made my choice and I have to live with it. That is what being free means. You get to make your own choices, but you also have to accept the consequences." "Do you think my father will ever forgive me?" Faith asked, even though she already knew the answer. "Honestly, probably not," Pierce said. "Men like your father do not forgive what they see as disobedience." "But that is his loss, Faith. You are smart and brave and full of life. Any father should be proud to have a daughter like you. If he cannot see that, then that is his failing, not yours." The words were a balm to Faith's wounded heart. She had spent so much of her life trying to earn her father's approval, trying to be the perfect daughter. It had never been enough. But maybe, as Pierce suggested, that was not her fault. Maybe some people were simply impossible to please, and the only solution was to stop trying. "What made you stop at the convent yesterday?" Faith asked. "You said you had business with my father, but was that really why you were there?" Pierce looked uncomfortable. "Honestly, I followed you. I was at the bank earlier in the day trying to get an appointment with your father. While I was waiting, I saw him arguing with someone in his office. I could not hear what was being said, but I could see his face through the window. He looked so angry, so cold. And then I saw you walking past outside, and you looked absolutely devastated. Something about the contrast struck me. Here was this girl who looked like her whole world was ending, and there was this man who did not seem to care at all about anyone's pain but his own." He paused, running his hand through his hair. "I know it sounds strange, but I could not stop thinking about you. I asked the clerk who you were, and he told me you were Samuel Langley's daughter. He also told me, because apparently the whole town loves to gossip, that you were being sent to the convent that very evening. It did not sit right with me. So when I saw your family heading in that direction, I followed. I did not have a plan, did not know what I was going to do. But when I saw you standing there, looking like you were facing execution instead of salvation, I just knew I had to do something." Faith felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You completely disrupted your life for a stranger. You ruined your business relationship with my father. You took me into your home, no questions asked. Why would you do that for someone you do not even know?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Pierce said simply. "And because when I looked at you, I did not see a stranger. I saw someone who needed help, who deserved better than what she was getting. And I saw someone I wanted to know, someone who looked like she had fire in her despite everything trying to put it out." He met her eyes across the table. "I am glad I followed that instinct. These 2 days with you have been the best days I've had in a very long time. Even though I do not know how to do anything useful," Faith asked with a small smile. "You learned fence mending in one afternoon," Pierce pointed out. "And you sat a horse for 8 hours straight without complaining once, even though I know you have to be sore as hell. You are tougher than you think, Faith Langley. You just needed the chance to prove it." That night, after Pierce had gone to the barn again despite her protests, Faith lay in bed thinking about how much her life had changed in just 2 days. She had gone from the prison of her father's house and the threat of the convent to this strange, wonderful freedom. She was living with a man she barely knew, doing work she had never imagined doing, and she had never been happier. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Faith woke early with the sun, helped Pierce with breakfast, and then spent the day learning the myriad tasks required to run a ranch. She learned to care for the chickens, gathering eggs and refreshing their water. She learned to work in the garden, weeding and watering the vegetables Pierce grew for his own table. She learned the basics of horse care, how to groom and feed, how to check for injuries or illness. Pierce was an endlessly patient teacher, never making her feel stupid for not knowing something, always willing to demonstrate and explain. And slowly, as they worked side by side, they began to truly know each other. Faith told him about the books she loved, about the stories she had written in secret. Pierce told her about his years working cattle drives, about sleeping under the stars and learning to read the weather and the land. They talked about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily as they moved through their tasks. Faith found herself watching him when he did not notice, admiring the economy of his movements, the quiet confidence with which he approached every task. He was unfailingly kind, not just to her but to the animals, to the land itself. She had never known a man could be both strong and gentle, both capable and compassionate, and she was beginning to realize that what she felt for him was not just gratitude. On the fourth day, Mrs. Henderson arrived in a wagon loaded with supplies. She was a formidable woman in her 60s, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. She looked Faith up and down with frank assessment, then nodded as if satisfied with what she saw. "So you are the girl who ran away from the convent," she said without preamble. "Good for you. That father of yours is a cold fish. I never liked him." Faith felt herself relax slightly. "Thank you for bringing these things. I know it must seem strange, Mrs. Henderson interrupted. "Girl, I applaud you. Too many women let themselves be pushed into lives they do not want because they are too afraid to choose otherwise. You had the courage to take your life in your own hands. That is admirable, not strange." She had brought practical clothes, sturdy dresses and split skirts suitable for riding, undergarments, a good pair of boots, a hat to protect from the sun. She had also brought soap and hairpins and other small necessities Faith had not even thought to request. The wagon also held foodstuffs, flour and sugar and coffee, as well as some luxury items like a tin of peaches and a small box of chocolates. "Pierce paid for everything," Mrs. Henderson said, waving away Faith's thanks. "He has an account at the general store. Good credit, that boy. Always pays his debts." She fixed Pierce with a stern look. "You are treating this girl right, I hope. I do not care if you saved her from the convent. If I hear you have been anything less than a perfect gentleman, I will have your hide." Pierce actually blushed. "Yes, madam. Faith has her own room and I have been sleeping in the barn. I am not taking advantage, I promise." "See that you do not," Mrs. Henderson said. Then she turned to Faith with a softer expression. "You come to me if you need anything, you hear, or if you just want to talk to another woman. Pierce is a good man, but he is still a man. You might need some female company from time to time." "Thank you," Faith said, surprised to find herself near tears at this unexpected kindness. "I appreciate that more than you know." After Mrs. Henderson left, Faith changed into one of the new dresses, marveling at how much better it fit than Pierce's oversized clothes. The dress was simple, dark blue cotton with no unnecessary frills, but it was well made and comfortable. She braided her hair and pinned it up properly, finally feeling presentable again. When she emerged, Pierce stopped what he was doing and just stared. "You look beautiful," he said, and the quiet awe in his voice made Faith's cheeks burn. "It is just a dress," she said, flustered. "It is not the dress," Pierce replied. "It is you. You look happy. That is what makes you beautiful." The compliment warmed Faith from the inside out. She was beginning to understand that Pierce did not give empty flattery. When he said something, he meant it. That evening, after dinner, Pierce pulled out a battered guitar from somewhere and began to play. Faith was surprised. He had not mentioned being musical. But he played well, his fingers moving confidently over the strings, coaxing out melodies that were at once mournful and hopeful. He sang in a rough but pleasant baritone, old songs about love and loss and the open road. Faith listened, enchanted. This was yet another dimension to the man, another layer revealed. When he finished a particularly lovely song about stars and promises, she applauded. "Where did you learn to play?" she asked. "My mother taught me when I was young," Pierce said. Music was important to her. She said it fed the soul when everything else was trying to starve it. He looked down at the guitar, his expression bittersweet. "I think of her every time I play. Hope she would be proud of the man I became." "I think she would be," Faith said softly. "I think she would be very proud." Pierce looked up at her, and something passed between them in that moment, something electric and profound. The air seemed to thicken, and Faith found herself unable to look away from his blue eyes. She saw want there, and tenderness, and a question he was too honorable to ask. Faith stood and moved closer to him, her heart pounding. She had never been forward with a man before, had never even thought to initiate anything. But something about this moment, about the music and the firelight and the way Pierce looked at her, made her brave. "Pierce," she said quietly, and his name on her lips felt like an invitation. He set the guitar aside carefully and rose to meet her. They stood very close, not quite touching, the space between them charged with possibility. "Faith," he said, his voice rough, "I do not want you to feel obligated. You do not owe me anything just because I helped you, because you are living here." "I know," Faith interrupted. She reached up and placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and fast beneath her palm. "This is not about obligation. This is about what I want, what I choose." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "I choose you, Pierce Thornton, not because I have to, but because I want to." The words hung between them for a heartbeat. Then Pierce cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle, and lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was soft at first, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Faith pressed closer instead, her hands sliding up to his shoulders. The kiss deepened, becoming something urgent and hungry, weeks of tension and growing attraction finally finding release. Pierce's arms came around her, pulling her against him, and Faith felt something inside her break open, some last defense crumbling away. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Pierce rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he whispered. "I know it is too soon, I know we barely know each other, but I need you to know, this is not just about attraction or convenience, this is real for me." Joy burst through Faith's chest like sunrise. "It is real for me too," she confessed. "I have never felt like this before. Safe and wild at the same time. Seen, valued, free. Marry me," Pierce said suddenly, pulling back to look into her eyes. "I know it is fast, I know you probably need time, but I am sure, Faith, I am more sure of this than I have been of anything in my life. Marry me. Not because you need protection or security, but because you want to. Because we are building something real here, something worth making permanent." Faith felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were tears of happiness. A week ago, she had been facing a forced commitment to a life she did not want. Now she was being offered a choice, a real choice, by a man who saw her as an equal partner rather than property to be managed. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." Pierce laughed, the sound joyous and disbelieving, and kissed her again. This time there was no hesitation, no holding back. This was a kiss of promise and celebration, of two people choosing each other freely and completely. They sat by the fire late into the night, making plans and dreaming dreams. They would be married soon, Pierce said, as soon as they could arrange it. He wanted to do it properly, with witnesses and a real ceremony, so no one could ever question the legitimacy of their union. Faith agreed, wanting to start this new chapter of her life with everything out in the open, nothing hidden or shameful. "Your father will probably try to stop us," Pierce warned. "He might even try to claim I kidnapped you or compromised you. Are you prepared for that?" "Let him try," Faith said with a confidence she had never felt before. "I am of age. I am choosing this freely. No one can force me back into that convent or into his house. I am done living according to his dictates." The next morning, Pierce rode into town to make arrangements. Faith stayed at the ranch, too nervous to face the gossip and stares yet. She spent the day cleaning the house from top to bottom, washing everything, making it shine. This was going to be her home, truly her home, and she wanted it to reflect the fresh start they were making. Pierce returned in the afternoon with good news. The minister at the Methodist church had agreed to perform the ceremony in 3 days' time. Mrs. Henderson had volunteered to stand up as a witness, and she had already started spreading the word among the more sympathetic members of the community. There would be support, Pierce assured Faith, people who were happy for them and willing to celebrate their union. He also brought less good news. Samuel Langley was indeed furious. He had gone to the sheriff, demanding that Pierce be arrested for kidnapping and corruption of a minor. The sheriff, a practical man named Tom Weaver, had pointed out that Faith was 19 and therefore of age to make her own decisions. Samuel had threatened to sue, to ruin Pierce's reputation, to do everything in his power to destroy them both. But Sheriff Weaver told him to go ahead and try, Pierce said with a slight smile. He said your father was making a fool of himself, and that most of the town was on our side. Apparently people have been watching Samuel Langley treat his family like possessions for years, and they are not inclined to help him drag his daughter back into his control. Faith felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had been so afraid that the entire town would condemn her, that she would be forever marked as a fallen woman. Knowing that at least some people understood and supported her made all the difference. The 3 days before the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Mrs. Henderson arrived with a dress for Faith, a beautiful cream-colored gown with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It had belonged to her daughter, she explained, who had married and moved to California years ago. She would be honored if Faith would wear it. Faith tried it on and found it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. She looked at herself in the small mirror, hardly recognizing the glowing woman staring back at her. This was not the frightened girl who had stood before the convent doors a week ago. This was someone new, someone strong and certain and happy. On the morning of the wedding, Faith woke before dawn, too excited to sleep. She dressed carefully, pinning her hair up in a style Mrs. Henderson had shown her, tucking a few wildflowers Pierce had picked into the dark waves. She looked at herself one last time, took a deep breath, and stepped out to meet her future. Pierce was waiting by the wagon, dressed in his best clothes. He had trimmed his hair and shaved carefully, and Faith thought she had never seen a more handsome man. When he saw her, his eyes lit up with such love and admiration that Faith felt her heart might burst. "You are radiant," he said, helping her into the wagon. "The most beautiful thing I have ever seen." They rode into town together, Faith's hand clasped tightly in Pierce's. As they approached the church, Faith saw a small crowd gathered. Her heart sank, afraid it was an angry mob come to stop the wedding. But then she saw the smiling faces, the people waving and calling out congratulations. Mrs. Henderson was there, and Sheriff Weaver with his wife, and old Pete Morrison, who insisted on claiming he had predicted this match from the start. Even some of the merchants and their families had turned out, people who had known Faith her whole life and were glad to see her choosing happiness. Her mother was there too, standing apart from the others, her face pale and uncertain. When Faith saw her, she felt a surge of complicated emotions. Part of her was still angry at her mother for not standing up to her father, for letting him dictate their lives so completely. But another part just felt sad for this woman who had never learned to choose her own path. Faith approached her slowly. "Mama," she said quietly, "I did not expect to see you here." Martha Langley's eyes filled with tears. "I could not let you marry without at least witnessing it. Your father forbade me to come, but I slipped away when he went to the bank." She reached out and took Faith's hands. "I am sorry I did not stand up for you. I am sorry I let him treat you the way he did. I was a coward." "You were afraid," Faith said gently. "I understand that. But I cannot live that way, Mama. I cannot spend my life being afraid." "I know," her mother whispered. "And I am proud of you for being braver than I ever was. I hope you will be happy, truly happy. This man, Pierce, he looks at you like you are the sun itself. Hold on to that. Do not let anyone take it from you." They embraced, and Faith felt something heal between them, even as she understood that their relationship would never be what it could have been. Her mother would go back to her father, would continue living the life she had chosen or accepted or been forced into, whatever the truth was. But at least she had come here today. At least she had borne witness to her daughter's choice. The ceremony itself was simple but profound. Faith and Pierce stood before the minister and spoke their vows in clear, steady voices. When Pierce slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Faith felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was meant to be. This was the life she was supposed to live. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister said with a smile. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Thornton." Pierce pulled Faith into his arms and kissed her deeply, not caring that half the town was watching. Faith kissed him back with all the love and hope in her heart, knowing that this moment marked the true beginning of her life. The crowd cheered, and Mrs. Henderson had somehow arranged for cake and punch to be served in the churchyard. People came up to congratulate them, to shake Pierce's hand and kiss Faith's cheek. It was a real celebration, a community gathering around two people who had chosen to build something beautiful together. As the sun began to set, Pierce and Faith drove back to the ranch, now truly theirs together. The house waited for them, warm and welcoming in the dusk. Pierce lifted Faith down from the wagon and then, to her surprise and delight, swept her up into his arms and carried her across the threshold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thornton," he said, setting her gently on her feet inside. "Mrs. Thornton," Faith repeated, savoring the name. "I like the sound of that." That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that took Faith's breath away. Pierce was gentle and patient, making sure she felt safe and cherished. And Faith discovered a whole new dimension to love, the way two people could become one in body as well as heart, the way pleasure and connection could intertwine into something transcendent. Afterwards, lying in Pierce's arms in the bed they would now share, Faith felt a peace she had never known. This was what life was supposed to be. This was what it meant to choose freely, to build something real with someone who saw you as an equal partner. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Pierce replied, his arms tightening around her. "Forever, Faith. This is forever." The first months of their marriage were a period of adjustment and discovery. Faith threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch life, determined to be a true partner to Pierce rather than a burden. She learned to make soap from lye and fat, to preserve vegetables for winter, to bake bread that actually rose properly. She learned to read the weather and predict storms, to recognize the signs of illness in the horses, to repair tack and mend fences. And she learned the rhythms of life with Pierce, the way he liked his coffee in the morning, the way he hummed while he worked, the way he always checked on the horses one last time before bed. She learned that he was ticklish along his ribs, that he had nightmares sometimes about his father, that he cried during particularly beautiful sunsets, though he tried to hide it. She learned every dimension of this man she had married, and fell more in love with him every day. Pierce, for his part, encouraged Faith's curiosity and interests. When he discovered she truly loved to read, he ordered books from San Francisco, building her a small library of novels and poetry and history. When she mentioned wanting to write, he bought her good paper and ink, encouraged her to pursue that dream. He never dismissed her interests as frivolous or inappropriate. He celebrated everything that made her who she was. Their life was not without challenges. The ranch required constant work, and there were setbacks and difficulties. A late summer drought meant they had to carefully manage water for the animals. A horse threw Pierce during training, leaving him with cracked ribs that took weeks to heal. Faith struggled with loneliness sometimes, missing female companionship and the social connections she had taken for granted in town. But through it all, they faced every challenge together, supporting each other through the difficult times and celebrating the victories. When Faith felt overwhelmed, Pierce reminded her how far she had come, how strong she had become. When Pierce doubted himself or worried about money, Faith reminded him of everything they had already accomplished, everything they were building together. Word of their successful marriage and Faith's transformation from banker's daughter to ranch wife spread through the community. Some people remained scandalized, particularly those close to Samuel Langley, but many more were inspired by their story. Faith began to receive visits from other women, some just curious, others seeking advice or simply wanting to talk to someone who had dared to choose her own path. Mrs. Henderson came by regularly, ostensibly to deliver supplies but really to check on Faith and share companionship. She and Faith became close friends, the older woman serving as a mentor and confidante. Through her, Faith slowly built a network of female friendship that enriched her life immensely. Faith's father never forgave her, never reached out or attempted reconciliation. It hurt, a dull ache that never quite went away, but Faith learned to accept it. She could not control his choices or his feelings. She could only control her own life and decisions. Her mother visited occasionally when Samuel was away on business. These visits were bittersweet, full of stilted conversation and unspoken regrets. But Faith treasured them nonetheless, grateful for whatever connection they could maintain. As autumn turned to winter, Faith realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but had waited to be certain before telling Pierce. On a cold December evening, as they sat by the fire after dinner, she finally shared the news. "I am with child," she said simply, watching his face for his reaction. Pierce went very still, his eyes widening. Then a smile spread across his face, so full of joy it seemed to light up the entire room. "Truly, we are going to have a baby, truly," Faith confirmed, laughing at his obvious delight. "Sometime in early summer, I think." Pierce pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "We are going to be parents," he murmured against her hair. "We are going to have a family." The pregnancy was not easy. Faith suffered from terrible nausea in the early months, and later the desert heat made her uncomfortable and swollen. But Pierce was endlessly patient and attentive. taking over more of the household tasks so she could rest, bringing her cool water and rubbing her aching back. He built a cradle by hand, painstakingly sanding and finishing the wood until it was smooth and beautiful. He prepared one of the small rooms as a nursery, painting it cheerful yellow and building shelves for the baby's things. As Faith's belly grew round with their child, she marveled at the life she had built. Less than a year ago, she had been a miserable girl facing imprisonment in a convent. Now she was a married woman, a ranch wife, about to become a mother. She had a home she loved, work that fulfilled her, and a husband who cherished her. It seemed almost impossible that so much could change in such a short time. On a blazing hot day in June 1883, Faith went into labor. Mrs. Henderson came to assist, along with the town midwife, a capable woman named Sarah Chen. Pierce paced anxiously outside while the women worked, occasionally coming to the door to check on Faith, his face pale with worry. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the afternoon and into the night. But finally, as dawn broke over the desert, Faith delivered a healthy baby boy. He had a shock of dark hair and blue eyes like his father, and when Pierce finally got to hold him, tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "He is perfect," Pierce whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with infinite gentleness. "Faith, you did it. He is perfect." They named him Samuel Pierce Thornton. Samuel after Faith's father in a gesture of reconciliation even if it was not received, and Pierce after his father who held him with such obvious love. Little Sam, as they called him, was a content baby, healthy and strong. Faith took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. She learned to nurse and soothe, to interpret different cries and needs. Pierce was a devoted father, happy to walk the floor with Sam when he fussed, to change diapers and rock him to sleep. They marveled together over every milestone, every smile and coo and accomplishment. The ranch continued to prosper. Pierce's reputation as a horse trainer grew, and he began to get requests from ranchers across the territory. The breeding program with Starlight proved successful, producing strong, intelligent foals that commanded good prices. They were able to expand the operation gradually, buying more land and increasing their herd. As Sam grew from baby to toddler, Faith found herself working on her writing more seriously. She began penning stories about the West, about strong women and the men who respected them, about choosing your own path even when the world told you otherwise. To her surprise and delight, a magazine out of San Francisco agreed to publish one of her stories. Then another, and another. She would never be a famous author, but she found satisfaction in the work, in crafting stories that might inspire other women to claim their own freedom. When Sam was 3 years old, Faith found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In the spring of 1887, she delivered a daughter. They named her Grace Martha Thornton, after Pierce's mother Grace and Faith's mother Martha. Little Gracie had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, and she seemed to come into the world with a fierce determination that delighted them both. Sam adored his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her, to show her his toys and treasures. Watching them together, watching Pierce play with both children with such obvious joy, Faith felt her heart might overflow with happiness. On a warm evening in June 1887, 5 years to the day after their wedding, Pierce and Faith sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Sam was carefully showing Gracie a caterpillar he had found, his little voice serious as he explained that it would someday become a butterfly. Gracie watched with wide eyes, fascinated by everything her big brother showed her. "Can you believe it has been 5 years?" Faith asked, leaning against Pierce's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Pierce replied. "I can still see you standing in front of that convent, looking like you were facing the end of the world. And then you chose to come with me, a complete stranger on nothing but faith and hope." "Best decision I ever made," Faith said. "You gave me my life back, Pierce. More than that, you gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other that," Pierce corrected. "You could have chosen the safe path, the respectable path, but you were brave enough to choose the unknown. That takes real courage." Faith watched her children playing, thought about the ranch they had built together, the community they had become part of, the love that had grown from a desperate moment into something deep and lasting. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked. "You said I could choose love instead of fear, freedom instead of prison, life instead of a living death." "I remember," Pierce said. "I chose all of that," Faith said. "And it gave me everything. It gave me you and Sam and Gracie. It gave me this life, this home, this happiness. I would not change a single thing." Pierce pulled her close and kissed her temple. "Neither would I. Not a single thing." As the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Faith thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. That frightened girl at the convent doors seemed like a different person now, someone from another life. She had been remade by her own choices, forged in the crucible of freedom into someone stronger and more complete. She thought about the women who might be facing their own convent doors right now, metaphorical or literal. Women who were being told who to be, what to want, how to live. She hoped that somehow her story might reach them. That they would know it was possible to choose differently, to claim their own lives even when everyone told them it was impossible. The children's laughter rang out in the evening air, and Faith smiled. This was legacy enough, this happiness, this freedom, this love. She had been given a choice in a moment of desperation, and she had been brave enough to take it. Everything that came after, all the joy and love and life, flowed from that one courageous decision. "Mama, come see," Sam called, waving excitedly. "The butterfly is coming out." Faith rose and walked to her son, Pierce following close behind. Together, the four of them knelt in the dust and watched as a monarch butterfly struggled free of its chrysalis, wet wings slowly unfurling in the fading light. It was a tiny miracle, this transformation from one form to another, this emergence into freedom and flight. The butterfly dried its wings in the last rays of sun, then took flight, rising up and up until it disappeared into the vast Arizona sky. Faith watched it go, tears pricking her eyes. She had been like that butterfly once, trapped and waiting, not knowing if she would ever be free. But someone had given her a choice, had asked her to be brave, and she had transformed into something new. "It is beautiful," Gracie whispered, her small hand clutching Faith's. "Yes, it is," Faith agreed. "Beautiful and free. Just like you will always be, my darling. Just like you will always have the right to be." That night, after the children were asleep, Faith and Pierce lay together in their bed, talking quietly about their dreams for the future. The ranch was doing well, better than they had dared hope. Sam was bright and curious, already showing an interest in the horses. Gracie was fearless and determined, ready to tackle any challenge. Life was good. "I have been thinking," Pierce said, "about expanding further, maybe buying the Patterson place when old man Patterson retires next year. It borders our property to the north. Would give us another 100 acres, maybe more." "Can we afford it?" Faith asked. "I think so, if we are careful. If the next few foal crops sell well, if we can get a good price for that string of cutting horses I have been training." Pierce paused. "But I want to make sure you are all right with it. This is your ranch too, Faith. You work as hard as I do to keep it running. You deserve equal say in these decisions." Faith felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. Even after 5 years of marriage, Pierce still found ways to remind her that she was his partner, not his possession, that her voice mattered, her opinions counted. "I think it is a good idea," she said. "More land means more security for the children, and you love this work. I want you to be able to grow the operation as much as you want." They talked through the details, making plans and considering options. This was one of Faith's favorite parts of their marriage, these quiet discussions where they built their future together. Nothing was dictated or demanded. Everything was decided mutually, with respect for each other's perspectives and needs. As Pierce drifted off to sleep, Faith lay awake a while longer, listening to the night sounds of the desert. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance. The horses moved quietly in the corral. A coyote sang its lonely song to the moon. These sounds had become the symphony of her life, as familiar and comforting as heartbeats. She thought about her father sometimes, wondering if he ever regretted his harshness, if he ever missed the daughter he had driven away. She thought about her mother, still living that quiet life of submission and acceptance. She felt pity for them both, but no longer any anger. They had made their choices, just as she had made hers. Everyone lived with the consequences of their decisions. Faith's mother continued to visit when she could, and Faith treasured those visits even though they were often awkward. Martha had met her grandchildren, had held them and loved them in her quiet way. It was not the relationship Faith might have wanted, but it was what was possible, and she accepted that with grace. Time passed, measured in seasons and harvests, in children's birthdays and anniversary celebrations. Sam grew tall and strong, developing his father's easy way with horses and his mother's love of stories. Gracie grew into a spirited child who feared nothing, who climbed trees and raced horses, and declared she would be a rancher when she grew up just like her papa. The ranch prospered beyond their hopes. Pierce's reputation grew until he was receiving requests from as far away as Texas and California. The breeding program produced consistently excellent horses. They bought the Patterson place and expanded further. Life was abundant. When Sam was 8 and Gracie 5, Faith discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was unexpected but welcome. Their third child, a son they named Daniel after Pierce's uncle who had encouraged him to follow his dreams, was born in the winter of 1892. He was a quiet baby with a thoughtful disposition, content to watch the world with serious dark eyes. 3 children filled the house with noise and laughter and chaos. Faith sometimes felt overwhelmed, but mostly she felt blessed. This big, loud, loving family was everything she had never known she wanted. This was the legacy of that choice she had made 10 years ago, standing before the convent doors. Yes, 10 years. It seemed impossible that so much time had passed. Faith was 30 now, Pierce 35. They were no longer the young couple who had taken such a wild chance on each other. They had been weathered by time and experience, tested by challenges and hardships, but they had endured, and their love had only grown stronger and deeper. On their 10th anniversary, Pierce surprised Faith with a trip. Mrs. Henderson agreed to watch the children for a few days, and Pierce took Faith to Flagstaff, a town she had never visited. They stayed in a hotel, a luxury they rarely experienced, and walked the streets like courting sweethearts. They ate in restaurants, attended a theater performance, and spent long hours just talking and being together without the constant demands of children and ranch work. On their last night there, as they sat together watching the sun set over distant mountains, Pierce took Faith's hand. "Do you remember what I asked you that first night at the ranch?" he said. "I asked if you regretted your choice." "I remember," Faith said, "and I told you I did not. "I still do not, Pierce, not for a single moment." "I am glad," Pierce said, "because I need you to know that you choosing me was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. You did not just agree to marry me. You chose to build this entire life with me. You chose to be my partner, my lover, my best friend. You gave me children and a home and a purpose beyond just work. You made me better than I ever could have been alone." Faith felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You gave me all those things too. You gave me freedom when I thought I would be trapped forever. You gave me respect when the world told me I was worthless. You gave me love when I did not even know what real love looked like. I am going to love you until the day I die," Pierce said. "And probably beyond that, if there is anything beyond. You are written into my soul, Faith Thornton. You are part of me now, inseparable." "And you are part of me," Faith whispered. "Forever." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, two people who had chosen each other freely and built something beautiful from that choice. They returned home to their children and their ranch, settling back into the rhythms of daily life. But something had been renewed between them, some promise reaffirmed. They were not just surviving together. They were thriving, building something that would last long after they were gone. Years continued to pass. The children grew and changed. Sam eventually decided he wanted to study veterinary medicine, a profession just becoming established in the West. Pierce and Faith supported his dream, even though it meant he would have to leave for school. Gracie did indeed become a rancher, working alongside her father with skill and passion that filled Pierce with pride. Daniel showed an unexpected talent for art, drawing and painting the landscapes around them with remarkable sensitivity. Faith continued to write, her stories gaining a modest following. She also became involved in women's causes, quietly supporting organizations that helped women leave abusive situations, that promoted education for girls, that fought for women's property rights and suffrage. She remembered what it felt like to be trapped, and she wanted to help others find their own freedom. Pierce supported her in all of it, proud of the woman his wife had become, the difference she was making in the world beyond their ranch. They had built something together that extended far beyond their own lives, touching others in ways they might never fully know. When Faith was 45, her mother died. Samuel sent a brief note informing her of the death and funeral details, but made it clear she was not welcome at the service. Faith went anyway, standing at the back of the church, tears streaming down her face for the woman who had never quite learned to choose her own happiness. After the funeral, as people filed out, Faith's father saw her. For a long moment they just stared at each other. Samuel looked old, Faith realized with a shock. Old and bitter and alone. Whatever satisfaction he had gained from his rigid control had clearly not brought him happiness. "Father," Faith said quietly, hoping even now for some kind of reconciliation. But Samuel just turned and walked away without a word. Faith watched him go, feeling sad but no longer hurt. She had made peace with his choice long ago. She could not force him to love her or accept her. She could only live her own life as well as possible. Pierce, who had stood beside her through the funeral, took her hand. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. "I am," Faith said, and realized it was true. "I am sad for him, actually. He is going to die alone and bitter, having pushed away everyone who tried to love him. What a waste of a life." They went home to their ranch, to their children and their horses and their hard-won happiness. And Faith understood more fully than ever what a gift she had been given, what a gift she had claimed for herself. The freedom to choose, to love, to build a life on her own terms. Not everyone got that chance. She would never take it for granted. The years continued their steady march. Sam became a veterinarian and opened a practice in Prescott, often riding out to help with the ranch animals. He married a smart young woman named Elizabeth who worked as a teacher. Gracie took over more and more of the ranch operations as Pierce slowed down, proving herself just as capable as her father. Daniel moved to San Francisco to study art, but came home regularly, always bringing new sketches and stories of city life. Faith and Pierce grew old together, their hair graying, their faces lining, their bodies slowing. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew richer and deeper with time, aged like fine wine into something complex and precious. On a spring morning in 1912, 30 years after their wedding, Faith woke to find Pierce still sleeping beside her. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating his face. He was 70 now, still handsome to her eyes, still the man who had given her a choice when no one else would. She watched him sleep, thinking about the life they had built. 3 children, all grown and happy and successful in their own ways. 6 grandchildren and counting, bright, beautiful souls who would carry their legacy forward. A ranch that had become one of the most respected horse operations in Arizona. A love story that had started with an impulsive choice and grown into something enduring and true. Pierce stirred and opened his eyes, smiling when he saw her watching him. "Morning, beautiful," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning, love," Faith replied, leaning in to kiss him softly. "What are you thinking about?" Pierce asked. "You have that far-away look." "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Faith said. "How one choice, one moment of courage 30 years ago gave me absolutely everything. I could have walked through those convent doors. I could have accepted the life my father chose for me. But instead, I chose you. I chose us. And it gave me this extraordinary life." Pierce pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I am the lucky one. You could have said no. You could have chosen safety over risk. But you were brave enough to trust me, to trust yourself. You changed my life completely, Faith, made it worth living." They lay together in the morning light, 2 people who had chosen each other freely and never regretted it for a single day. Outside, they could hear Gracie calling to the horses, the sounds of the ranch coming to life. Soon, they would rise and join the day, continuing the work they loved. But for now, they simply held each other, grateful beyond words for everything they had been given, everything they had built. That evening, the whole family gathered for Sunday dinner, as had become their tradition. The house was full of noise and laughter, children running everywhere, conversations overlapping, love abundant. Faith looked around the table at her children and grandchildren, at Pierce at the head of the table telling one of his stories, and felt her heart overflow with joy. After dinner, as the family relaxed on the porch watching the sunset, Sam raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, "to my parents who showed all of us what real love looks like, what real partnership looks like, what real courage looks like. To Mama and Papa," Gracie added, "who built all this from nothing but hard work and hope. To choosing love over fear," Daniel said softly, "to choosing freedom over safety, to choosing each other every single day." Everyone raised their glasses, and Faith felt tears slide down her cheeks. This was what her choice had created. Not just a marriage or a ranch, but an entire family, an entire legacy of love and freedom and courage. It rippled outward like rings in water, touching lives she would never know, inspiring choices she would never witness. As the stars came out over the Arizona desert, Faith leaned against Pierce's shoulder and watched her family. This was everything. This was what it meant to choose well, to live fully, to love completely. She had been given a choice in front of those convent doors, and she had been brave enough to choose love instead. It had made all the difference. Years later, when Faith was 82 and Pierce 87, they sat together on the same porch, their bodies frail but their love undiminished. They had lived longer than either expected, blessed with health and happiness. Their children were grown, their grandchildren becoming adults, great-grandchildren beginning to arrive. The ranch continued under Gracie's capable management, thriving as it had for decades. On a warm June evening, Pierce took Faith's hand. "Do you know what today is?" he asked. "Our anniversary," Faith said with a smile. 55 years, I could never forget." 55 years, Pierce repeated wonderingly. "More than half a century. And I love you more now than I did on that first day." "I love you too," Faith said. "Thank you for giving me a choice. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for this beautiful life." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, hands clasped, two souls who had become one long ago. When the first stars appeared, Pierce squeezed her hand gently. "No regrets?" he asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. "Not a single one," Faith replied, as she always did. "You?" "None at all," Pierce said. "This has been the greatest adventure of my life." They remained on the porch until the sky was full of stars, until their family called them in for dinner, until life in all its beautiful chaos demanded their attention once more. And they went gratefully, hand in hand, still choosing each other, still choosing love after all these years. In the end, that was the story. Not a tale of dramatic rescues or grand gestures, though it had started with both. Rather, it was a story of daily choosing, of two people building a life together brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. It was a story of freedom found and love grown and courage rewarded. It was a story of a woman who stood before convent doors and chose to walk a different path, and a man who offered her that choice without demanding anything in return. It was a love story, pure and simple and true. And like all the best love stories, it was built on respect and partnership, and the fundamental belief that people should be free to choose their own happiness. Faith Langley Thornton lived to be 85, Pierce to 90. They died within weeks of each other, as if neither could bear to be parted from the other for long. Their children buried them side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch forever over the land they had loved and the family they had built. At the funeral, their eldest grandson read from one of Faith's stories, about a woman who chose freedom over fear and found everything she had ever dreamed of. It was fiction, but everyone there knew it was also truth, the story of Faith and Pierce's own beginning. "Choose love," the grandson read, his voice carrying over the assembled family. "Choose freedom, choose life, and never ever let anyone else choose for you. Your life is yours to live, yours to shape, yours to fill with whatever brings you joy. That is the greatest gift anyone can give themselves. The courage to choose." The words echoed across the desert that Faith had called home for more than 60 years, carried on the wind like a promise, like a legacy, like a love song that would never end. And in the hearts of everyone gathered there, everyone who had been touched by Faith and Pierce's story, the message took root and grew. Choose love. Choose freedom. Choose courageously. Build something beautiful with someone who sees you as an equal. Never settle for less than you deserve. It was a simple message, but profound. And it lived on long after Faith and Pierce were gone, passed down through generations, inspiring others to make their own brave choices, to claim their own freedom, to build their own love stories. Because in the end, that was what mattered. Not the grand gestures or dramatic moments, but the daily choice to love well, to live freely, to honor the precious gift of a life lived on your own terms. Faith had learned that lesson standing before convent doors more than half a century ago, and she had lived it every day since. She had chosen love, and love had given her everything. That was her legacy. That was her gift. That was the story of how a woman facing imprisonment chose freedom instead, and how that single choice created ripples of love and courage that would last for generations. And it all began with a cowboy who saw a woman in distress and asked her a simple question. Will you choose love instead? Faith had answered yes. And that yes had changed everything.